Good evening. I'm Phil Hobson. I'm the pastor here at First Congregational Church. I am delighted to welcome you all here this evening. About 10 years ago, we figured it out, Doug and Jan and my wife and I had dinner together at Mary Beth and Pat Whiteman's house and had talked about this back then. And of course, as life happens, things get in the way, and at that point it would have been an academic kind of exercise. Now it is a much more important exercise to understand our neighbors around the world. This evening is the first of a 6-week series, and it's on Tuesday nights, and thank you all for being here. This was made possible by our Tuesday night troublemakers. That's my name for the group. And if you're a part of that group, could you stand up? The folks who meet on Tuesday night to put this sort of thing together. Thank you. It is so good to have so many of you here. Look forward to hearing about our neighbors. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Professor Sjoquist.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you very much for coming. I think this is great that we have a group like this, 35, 40 people. I mean, it's amazing. This is the right time to be doing things like this, about learning about other religious systems. But I wanted to make a statement about faith. And the cool thing about faith is that it's yours, and nobody can take it away from you. No professor, no pastor, no monk, no Buddhist priest or anything. Nobody can take it away from you. It's yours, right? But, there's a great danger in embracing our faith blindly. So, we have to work a little bit harder as Christians and Muslims and Hindus and Buddhists. We all have to work a lot harder on the knowledge part of it. Right? So I really, think that this group, by coming here tonight, you guys are very courageous in doing what you're doing, because it's, as you know, there's great danger in embracing your faith blindly. And we live in a pretty dangerous world right now, and it's time to get together and talk to other people of other faiths, and they need to do the same. Right? It's not just a one-way street for Christians, but Muslims need to do the same and Hindus need to do the same. So the time is good for doing this. I think that, it's something that's, required of us, but I think that, you guys have a lot of courage by coming here tonight to do this, because it takes a lot of courage to get out of your blind faith comfort zones and start thinking outside the box. But that's exactly what we need to be doing. This is a good time to do this. So, if you think about, Jesus's teachings, and, he didn't ask us to follow him blindly. He said, follow my teachings, right? And the Buddha says the same thing. He says, he didn't expect his followers. In fact, he told his followers, don't take my word for it. Test the truth of what I say against your own experiences. So it takes knowledge. This is the part that we have to work a little bit harder on. We have the faith. We need to work a little bit harder on the knowledge part. So what do we expect to come away with by taking a seminar on world religions for the next 6 weeks? I don't know. You might have some. You have obviously your own expectations about what you would like to come away with. But I put up a few things that might resonate with you. I think that, one of the things that I want you to come away with anyway is that, people throughout world history have manifested numerous and diverse ways of thinking about the world and responding to the world. I think, that's not that hard to understand. There's a lot of diversity in rituals. There's a lot of diversity in lifestyles, all of that. But, it's fun to do this. Respecting others who are different or have different worldviews is something that enriches us rather than diminishes us. And I think a lot of people think the opposite. But I think learning about other cultures and other religions is a very enriching experience. Common human needs, questions, dreams underlie religious differences, as well as cultural, national, racial, ethnic, linguistic differences. The same questions are being asked by everybody around the world. They just have a little different perspective on how to answer those things. There's different ways, as I said, of thinking about the world and responding to the world. You know, Malcolm X, you guys probably heard of Malcolm X, who used to belong to the Nation of Islam. You know, he preached, you know, some violence, you know, at first until he went to Mecca on the pilgrimage, right? And he had an epiphany there. He came away thinking that, you know, there's all these different people here. They come from Saudi Arabia, they come from Africa, they come from all these different countries, Malaysia, Indonesia, and you know what? They all snore in the same language, right? He says there's something that's underlying all of these differences. And that's what I hope we can really start understanding a little bit more about, is the similarities between us rather than the differences. So I think it's also useful and enlightening to view religions and life itself comparatively. So anything that you guys have, anything that you might want to get out of this, besides maybe something that I didn't put up on the board? Any expectations or something? Tonight's going to be a fun night. We're going to do a lot of demography and geography. If we're going to study world religions, we ought to know where they are, right? We ought to know how many there are, things like that. Easy. Ramona, go ahead.
I think so much of what we do is think of all these various religions as just being very different from us, and I'd like to know what are some of the commonalities.
That's exactly what we're going to work on. We need to know what binds us together as human beings, because that'll take away a lot of that stressful living. But go ahead. Somebody else had something. Go ahead.
I was going to say, my first curiosity is who shows up to a world religion?
Yeah.
So I'm already,
Yeah.
the people actually will show up and,
Yeah.
with an open mind to see something.
That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. The people that are already open-minded, it's like preaching to the choir, so to speak, right? But I still think we can learn quite a bit. I was just talking to somebody about teaching students, young students, and I'm very upbeat and optimistic about a lot of the young people today, the students that I have in my classes anyway at MSU. They're so tolerant, and they're so tolerant of diversity and everything else, but they really, really want to learn about other cultures and other religions, and it's kind of fun. And so I see that to me is a positive thing. But there's still another group that's out there that doesn't want to hear any of this kind of stuff. So anyway, I thought I would, before we get into the nitty-gritty of all this stuff, I thought I would start out with a test. I'm a teacher, by the way, right? So I'm always messing around with students and giving them quizzes because it's a great way to get conversations going. So I want you to tell me which of the following statements is not correct. Letter A says, the country with the largest Sikh population outside of India is the United States. B, India has the largest following of Buddhists in the world. C, Indonesia has the largest population of Muslims in the world. D, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism all originated in Asia. So what do you guys think? One of those statements is not correct. Only one of them. Dennis, what do you think? C? How many say C? How many say letter C? Okay, that's not the correct response though. But listen, this is what we're here to learn about. Because Indonesia is the country that has the largest number of Muslims. It's not Egypt, it's not Iraq, it's not Iran, it's not Saudi Arabia, it's Indonesia. 244 million Muslims there. What's the other choice? B. What is it? B? How many say B? Okay. B is the correct response. Okay, you'll get the A+ today, Scott. He sat in the front row, he says, I'm going to get an A+ today. I said, you'll have to earn it. He earned it. Listen, even though Buddhism started in India, it's a country where there's very few Buddhists in that country now. It's been suppressed, it's been displaced by, majority of Hindus. 80% of the population of India is Hindu. And probably about 13 or 14% is Islamic, right? Muslims. And then you have probably, 6% is maybe Sikh and Jain and Buddhist and Zoroastrian, put them all together, into that category. But what country has the largest population of Buddhists? You might think of India, but it's not India.
China. The United States.
Yeah, we're going to say Japan. Japan has it. However, the statistics that we have on China are very, very hard to come by. And so it's unreliable. But there may be as many as 102 million Buddhists in China. But, they don't come out and say that. And the government is certainly not going to provide a lot of statistics about religious populations. So probably China, but to be safe, we'll say Japan. Okay? The country outside of India that has the largest Sikh population is the United States. There's a lot of Sikhs here in the U.S. and in North America. There's a very large Sikh population in Vancouver, Canada. Toronto has a very large one. We have them here in Lansing. We have a Sikh Gurdwara here in Lansing. Windsor has a very big Sikh Gurdwara or temple. They're here. And then one other one before we get down into the nitty-gritty. It's about Christianity. It says, Christianity is a dominant religion in each of the following countries except. So what about your answer here on this one? What do you guys think? Huh? What about Philippines? It's a Southeast Asian country. Is it Christian? It's heavily Christianized. It's Roman Catholic. 97% of the population of the Philippines is Christian, and particularly Roman Catholic, right? Philippines were colonized by the Spanish, right, in the 16th century, and became a Spanish colony, and then it became a U.S. colony for a while, right, till after World War II ended. But it was always a Roman Catholic country, and it was brought there by Spain. Brazil? Christian country or not? Heavy Christian country. Roman Catholic again, right? And in this case, the Portuguese. Portuguese are the ones who brought Roman Catholicism from Europe to Brazil. Ethiopia? What about Ethiopia? It's Christian. That's a Christian country. Ethiopia. Eastern Orthodox, Coptic, right? But it's a Christian country. And Albania, which is a small country in Europe, right? Islamic. It's an Islamic country. It's probably one of the poorest countries in Europe. But it's by Croatia and Macedonia. That area right there is where you'll find Albania. It used to be part of the Ottoman Empire. Okay? Learned something already, right? All right. I thought this would be really kind of fun today. is to, talk a little bit about this, the results of this survey that was done in 2010. The Pew Research Company, or Pew Research Center on Religion and Public Life, had its beginnings in about 2001, I think, out of the University of Chicago. And they conducted a survey. This is very rare in the United States where you can actually conduct a religious survey of the American population. Some other countries do this. We'll talk about Japan doing this back in the 80s. But it's very insightful to find out what the results of this study were. But it's the first, I put this up on the board because it's the first nationwide survey of religious knowledge, and there were 32 questions on the test. And the survey results were based on 3,412 adults who answered questions on the Bible and also on world religions. And you see what the average score was? That's a 0.0 in my book. My grade book, they would not pass, right? 50%. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Yeah, not really. Maybe not really. But, there's only I'll get some of the results of, but some of the, questions like you would be asking, whether or not the golden rule that's in Matthew, right, about do unto others what you would have them do unto you, was part of the 10 Commandments. Man, people got that wrong a lot, right? Only 55% of the people who took this survey got that correct, that it was not part of the 10 Commandments. 0.0. But here's some interesting parts of this. Atheists, those people who identified themselves as atheists and agnostics, scored the highest on the survey. It's not pretty. It was 1.5, it's still a 1.5 grade point average. It's still below average, but they scored the highest. Roman Catholics scored the lowest with only 15 questions answered correctly, so they got a 47%, 0.0. 54% of those surveyed could identify the Quran as Islam's holy book, right? Another 0.0 grade. Mormons and Jews scored higher than evangelical Protestants on questions about the Bible and Christianity. So, there's have you guys ever heard of a scholar by the name of Diana Eck? She wrote a book called Religions in America, and I would highly recommend it. I think when I get done with this seminar, I'm going to give you a recommended reading list of books that you might be interested in. But this would be one of them. And she's was part of she is a professor at Harvard University and was part of the Pluralism Project that started back in, about 2001, somewhere around there. I have a quotation of her. She started out her book on a New Religious America. She says, "We, the people of the United States," remember this is the first part of our Constitution, right, "now form the most profusely religious nation on earth." The United States is religiously diverse, for sure. Just like India. India is probably as diverse from a religious standpoint. But the United States is very diverse. We have a lot of different kinds of religious systems here in the U.S. And they're not these, the thing I try to impress upon people is that these religions are not out there anymore. They're not across the ocean somewhere. They're not some foreign entity. They're actually right here in our own communities. Within a 25-mile radius of Charlotte, you can go to a Hindu temple, you can go to Buddhist temples, you can go to a Sikh gurdwara, you can go to a mosque, you can go to various kinds of Christian churches, right? It's all within, they're our neighbors now. It's not something that's foreign. So this is where that knowledge part is. We got to get to know our neighbors a little bit better, and they need to get to know us better too. And by the way, you can take this quiz online if you guys are interested in doing it. If you go to the, just go to the Pew Report, and there's a section there where you can click on the quiz. You can do that if you want to do that. But I don't know, what do you guys make of the survey? What are we to make of all this? Why are we so misinformed about not only other religions but our own religion? They don't teach religion in school.
So if you're unchurched, you wouldn't even know about Christianity.
Yeah. Well, they do here. You guys are taking a class on Christian history here, which is awesome, right? Some schools do, but I agree with that because a long time ago I did a survey of, I think there's 34 high schools in the Tri-County area, and only 3 of those schools offered a comparative religions class as a senior alternative class to take. Only 3. Unreal. Ramona, go ahead.
I was gonna say the quote that I hear in a number of different situations, but it's like, my mind's made up, don't confuse me with the facts.
Say that again.
My mind's made up, don't confuse me with the facts.
Yeah, I think there's some of that there. I don't have, you guys have answers for that too. Go ahead.
I think a lot of people are just complacent and would rather be told what to do than find out what to do.
I think that's part of it.
What did he say? I think it would be
He said that people are very complacent. They would rather be told what to do rather than to actually go out there and be active and figure it out.
I think it'd be interesting to note the age group of those people surveyed. Were they a lot younger, a lot older? I was raised in very constrained religions, so we didn't read the Bible, didn't know any other religions, and I've evolved, but earlier on, if I had taken that test, I would have been way in the bottom.
Yeah, I'm interested in that too. The age group, they were adults. So we can find out though what the age group was. They have that. If you just go online, they'll tell you what the age group was. And actually how they conducted the survey. It's interesting. Any other thoughts on this? Go ahead.
I think because from the time we're this big and old enough to listen, we listen to everything that is told to us by other people, and we don't, as we grow, we don't form our own opinion of what is being told to us as being true. You have to look into it. You have to decide for yourself, because in my view, the Bible that was written 200 years ago is not the same Bible that was written
Not the
here,
same.
because it's interpreted by somebody, rewrites it, and the change of one word can mean the change of a whole sentence.
Yeah, very insightful. So this carries over into religion, doesn't it?
So
This is what blind faith, right? You just don't question it.
Whether we come to this church or any other church, we're listening to and we're being guided by whatever the pastor's message is that day.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And we're not really questioning any of it. So we just take it as that's true because that's what it says in the Bible.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what following or embracing your religion blindly is about.
You have to really think about it.
You got to think about it.
And you have to study it, and just like all these other religions on the page before this,
Yeah.
the atheists and stuff, in order for them to be at the top of their game at what they're against, they have to know about
They have to
who
know
they're
about
fighting
it.
against,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So then when you get down to the Jews and them, they've been persecuted so much, they study it because they want to know
Yep.
the truth. All the people in between are just like the sheep, and just
That's what it
follow the
is.
leader.
Yeah. Yeah, those are all good insights you guys have.
It feels like questioning has been weeded out of the process. And
Questioning has been
sometimes
weeded out.
militarily.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. I think that you guys agree with that. He said that questioning has been weeded out of the
The process of
religion making. Yeah, I think that's right.
You weren't allowed to question.
You're not allowed. You know, if you grew up in a Catholic situation, you get whacked a few times. I mean, you know, doing all that. You know, I mean, it's, you know, so we're taught from our parents, you know, not to question. My dad would say, "This is the way it is. If you don't like it, just get out then."
Yeah.
Right? So it took a lot of courage to leave after a while. But yeah, I think that's right. I think you guys are onto this without any question about it. So there's a couple of terms that I think we need to kind of look at, and I have to remind students of this also, but I also remind people that, you know, we're not really, in a seminar like this, we're not doing theology. We're doing something that's more like religious studies. We're learning about other world religions, or, you know, looking at it as an outsider, trying to look in at it. But theology is really much more faith-based, and religious studies is much more reason-based. And I said at the very beginning, we need to work a little bit harder on the knowledge part of it, right? So, and usually, if you think about theological schools like the Jesuit schools, there's a lot of Jesuit universities here in the United States, and we have a lot. We have Siena Heights is Dominican, I think, right? Is it, Phil? Dominican? I think it's Dominican. But you know what I mean, right? They're a little bit more in line with you know, with a seminary school than the public institutions like Michigan State or something like that. They do religious studies. At Michigan State, we do religious studies. We don't do theology. And another couple of terms that, you know, really come to play here are these two terms, belief and knowledge. And I started out, you know, the seminar talking about faith, you know, or belief, you know, so where faith and belief are connected together. But, you know, belief is really an opinion, right? That, you know, is in the absence of supporting empirical evidence, you know, and observable, measurable things. That's what a belief is. There's nothing wrong with beliefs. In fact, they give our lives a lot of meaning. They give our lives purpose. But they're beliefs. And knowledge is something different. Knowledge is an opinion, but there is evidence to back it up, right? There's some measurable, observable, and public evidence to back it up. And this is the difference between knowledge and belief. And I think, you know, it's important to have both of these things in our lives. It's important to have both of them. And too often we rely too much on this and not enough on the other part of it. So it's justifiable. So what do you guys think about this? Which of these statements represents belief? Which of these represents knowledge? What about the first one? Both heaven and hell are real. It's a belief. Okay? Is it right or wrong? We can't really tell, right? There's no way to measure this. We have to rely on the authority of others, you know, on this. And what about the second one? Buddha was a god. Belief. It's a belief. Nobody in Buddhism thought he was a god either, right? But it's a belief, right? What about the third one? Hinduism is the world's oldest living religion. Belief or knowledge? Knowledge. It's knowledge. We know that. It's observable, measurable. We've done archaeological studies. We've studied texts. It's older than Judaism. What about the fourth one? Jesus was born in Asia and became an African political refugee before he was even 2 years old. It's true. That's knowledge. right? That's knowledge. And people are sometimes taken aback by that. How can Jesus be Asian? Well, where is he born? Israel. And where is Israel? Europe? It's Asia. Western Asia. Just like Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Turkey, those are all Western Asian countries. He's an Asian-born baby. And he became a political refugee. Remember that? Remember the story of that? He's a refugee.
Where did he go?
He went to Africa. Well, it's in, what we would call the Sinai Peninsula area now. Egypt. Mm-hmm. Good. So sometimes, I use these things to surprise students into thinking, right? Get them going a little bit. So somebody asked, and I think, Ramona, you were the one who asked, what is it that we have in common? What do we, expect religious systems to have in common? So I jotted down, I started thinking about this. I think that, this is what we can say. There's probably other things that I didn't put in here that can also be said. But, when we walk away from this seminar in 6 weeks, I hope that we really understand that there are a lot more similarities between world religions than there are differences. And one of them is that everybody, whatever religion you're thinking about, has some view of the absolute or some view of the divine, whether we call the divine God, whether we call the divine Jehovah or Yahweh or Brahman. Sometimes we depersonalize it and call it Tao, right? But we all have a view of the absolute. And you would not believe how similar it is. Once you get through the language parts of it, you would not believe how similar it is. All of them. They all have that. A view on the nature of the universe. Religions tend to have some view about how the nature of the universe works. They have creation stories. They have, what they call cosmogonies. These are creation stories. All religions have that. Most of them, I shouldn't say all of them, but most of them do. And one of the things that you find when you start studying creation myths, among world religions, you find out how similar this stuff is. They have primordial parents. In the Bible, in Genesis, we have Adam and Eve, right? The first parents. In Shinto, we have Izanagi and Izanami, right? The first parents. In Hinduism, we have Brahma and Saraswati, right? The first parents. And all of humanity comes from them, right? In Native American cultures, if you think about Pawnee culture in the Midwest, they have the Eastern Star and the Western Star. It's very similar. Flood stories, there's flood stories in all these creation myths also. Similar. So view on the origins of the universe is very similar in many of these religious systems that we talk about, right? And by the way, when you talk about origins of the universe, so the technical word that they use in religious study is cosmogony, right? It's a word that specifically talks about the study of the origins of the world. Now, scientists are cosmogonists too, because they talk about Big Bang theory, they talk about how the universe comes into being. That's part of it too. This is not always like this in all religions, but it's especially true in the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition, and Zoroastrianism has this also. You have an eschatology that goes with it, right? So if there's a creation, there must be an end, right? And so if you think about this kind of a worldview, it's very linear. It's a very linear worldview. There's a beginning, and it goes like this, and then there's an end, right? But a lot of religious systems don't buy that. They think the world is cyclical. It goes through cycles, right? of creation and destruction and daytime, and how they come to that conclusion, because they look around them in the natural world and they say, well, day turns to nighttime, nighttime turns to daytime, daytime turns to nighttime. That's the way the world works. Spring is followed by winter, right? Summer comes after spring, fall comes after the summer. It just keeps on going like that. So a lot of these religions have a very cyclical way of looking at things. It's not linear. So they don't have an eschatology. They don't have a lot of things about the end times or something like that. And if they have a cosmogony, it's people think of it more in metaphorical terms. They have a view of human beings. Every religious system has some view about human beings. Are human beings inherently good? Are human beings inherently bad? Do we need some divine intervention to save us because we're so bad? It's very different, but everybody has a view of human nature. If you ask medieval Catholics, medieval Christians, you heard about the doctrine of original sin and all that stuff, and we're very bad. We're born very bad, right? And that's why we need divine intervention to come and help save us. It's only through grace that we're going to be saved from that inherent nature that we have, that we're born with. It's a carryover from Adam and Eve's sin, right? But if you look at Confucianism, which we'll take a look at in this unit, human beings aren't born bad. They're born inherently good. They're good. People are all good. But, it doesn't mean that they always do good things. They do bad things, but their inherent nature is good. But, it's because of social conditions. It's about parents. It's about the government. It's about the institutions that they grew up in. That's what kind of makes them do bad things. But it's not a fault of their inherent nature, which is good. Different. Everybody has an ethical system. They all have ethics. And ethics are guidelines by which we should live to attain what they think is salvation. I put that in quotation marks because in some countries we call it enlightenment. Whatever is there to save us or to help us become a better person. Buddhists always talk about just being a good person. That's the goal. It's just to be a good person. You don't have to worry about all the other stuff. Just be a good person. And here's how you can do it. We'll talk about Buddhism when we get to the third week. And they have some religions, not all of them, but most of them have some view about what happens to you after you die. They have some belief system there. Shinto and some other religious systems are very cloudy. It's almost like the Greeks. What happens to you after you die? I don't know. You go to this dark place, and it's not much detail about that in some religions. Others have great detail. So I think, Ramona, that's a good question that you asked, and I think this might help a little bit, with some of the things that they have in common. And it's worthwhile to check it out. But they all have this underlying all that diversity and all the differences in world religions. This is what we have in common. And if you look at even some of the ethical systems, just about every world religion has something to do with karma, or as you sow, so shall you reap. It has that. You have, they're very similar. The ethics are very similar. So there's a lot of differences, and these differences I think are worthwhile looking at to find out, how do you think these things arise in the first place? What is it that, we have these things in common, but at the same time, why is there so many differences among world religions? What is it that helps us to understand what's going on with this? And I think this is one of the reasons why my psych students, I have a lot of psych people that take my classes, and I think this is kind of an underlying thing for them. They want to know what's going on with this. But I want you to evaluate. This is one of India's great saints. He's still alive. He's in his 90s. He's in very poor health right now. He'll probably pass away pretty soon. Haridas Baba has been around since the 1930s. He's a monk a Hindu monk who stopped speaking. He did this as a religious practice. He just stopped speaking. And so he used to carry a chalkboard around his neck and he would write things out if he had to. But that was his practice. He became silent. Who are the monks in Christianity that do the same? The Benedictines might, but there's another group that does that they don't speak. Who is it? Oh no, Brendan, no, it's not the Congregationalists. What is the? It's the one that Thomas Merton belonged to, the Trappist monks. So it's a practice. It's a spiritual practice. One that my wife says I should practice every now and then, right? Maybe on Fridays, something, I don't know. But what do you guys think about this? This is what he said. He said, when a pickpocket meets a holy man, he sees only his pockets. In other words, a pickpocket sees only the holy man's pockets. What do you think?
I think they're trying to say that our perception of things is very narrow. If we were a pickpocket, that would be all we see, but as a Christian, we only see the Christian faith, not the other face.
That's right. Nice job on that. That's exactly right.
Did I get it?
Yep, absolutely. You don't even have to sit in the front row to get that A. I think that's right. Did you hear what she said? We develop a particular way of looking at the world. This is something that we call, in psychology, we call this conditioning. And you know what? We're religiously conditioned also. We're not only culture conditioned, but we also have religious conditioning. We're taught to look at the world in a very specific, culturally specific, religiously specific way. And we're also taught, as you guys mentioned, not to even question it. So this is really kind of an interesting part of the psychology of religious studies is how does this religious conditioning affect our relationships with others, especially with other religions, right? And I think you guys are already on to this. But you know that because of religious conditioning, a Christian is going to see the world through the eyes of Christianity. A Buddhist is going to see, the world through a Buddhist lenses. Hindu is going to do the same. The Muslims are going to do the same. They're going to look at things from their own perspective. That's the one that they've grown up with. They're comfortable with it. They're not comfortable getting outside of that zone. But how might that religious conditioning be negative when we're studying other world religions? It's putting blinders on. It's like, you have such a myopic viewpoint, right? And there's no room for anything else in there. So I thought we'd explore that a little bit with some exercises. And Phil, I think you'll like this one because it has to do with the Japanese Americans. Back in the 1980s, this is about 1980, I don't know, it was 88 or 89 or something. They were American and Japanese researchers who wanted to take a look at this business about culture conditioning. When does culture conditioning start? When do kids start, thinking in their own religiously conditioned way and their own culturally conditioned way? And so they devised an experiment. They took a group of American students, and they were ages 4 through 6, and they took a group of Japanese students, 4 through 6, and they put them in the same room, and they gave them exactly the same instructions. And they were to, I think they were to draw a picture of their family and their home and all this kind of stuff, and, where they lived and all that. But it was really interesting when the researchers took all these 400 drawings that the kids made. They could just easily tell, oh, this is Japanese student, this American student's Japanese American. They could easily go through there and tell which is which. Can you tell which one was done by Japanese and which one was done by the American? Japanese is on the right. How come? Dark-haired? They're having fun? Yeah, they are. But I see some smiles on the other ones there. But this is exactly right. It's a good insight, but the Japanese kids universally, look at the sun. Look at the sun. Almost universally, the Japanese kids drew their sun red or colored it red, just like in the Japanese flag. And the Americans all colored it orange or yellow, right? That's the way they did it. They still do it that way. Yeah?
There's language here too. We teach our kids nouns, they teach their kids words, what is nouns, what is words.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So how would that affect the results?
Well, one perceives their world as an action item and one perceives the world as full of stuff.
It's full of stuff, yeah. As more passively.
Right.
Yeah. But it's really interesting when you look at these kinds of studies. So what the researchers were telling us is that, this kind of conditioning starts at a very early age, really early age. And by the time you get to middle school, then it's already set because the teacher is giving the class instructions, and you have a little Japanese boy over here, Hideo, and and Hideo is drawing something, and you're drawing something, and you're looking over at Hideo's papers. Man, that's really wrong. He's giving him an elbow. That's wrong, Hideo. Come on. It's not wrong. It's just different. But what we know from studies is that culture conditioning, religious conditioning, it starts very early, really early. And I use this in class all the time. I love this little experiment, but we use it in psychology too. But it's a way to illustrate that there are different ways of thinking about the world. And even though we don't see it initially, if we look at it, we might be able to change our perspective if we study it, right? So what do you see in this graphic up on the screen?
Young face and an old face.
You see a young woman? Yes. How many people see a young woman? You should be able to see a young woman, right? In this study, when it first came out, everybody almost universally could see the young woman. And one of the reasons that researchers were looking at it is because all the people doing the tests were young people. But there is an older woman in this, right? Can you see it? But it takes a lot more effort. I'm telling you, it takes a lot more effort to switch positions than what we're accustomed to. This is about conditioning. And it's really deeply rooted in our consciousness. And the message here is that it takes a lot of effort to see things from a different perspective, from another person's perspective. Some of you might see that old woman in here. The young woman is looking over her right shoulder, right? And this is a necklace here, and this is her chin line right here. Her eye is right here, her ear is right here. She's got hair and a scarf on. She's looking over behind her, right, over her shoulder. The old woman is looking down. This is the old woman's mouth. This is her chin. This is an eye. This is her nose. She's looking down, right, in her shawl or something, right? So the purpose of doing this is just to let you know that there are different ways of looking at the world. And is one particular way of looking at this right and the other one necessarily wrong? Or is it just different? That can all be applied to religious studies. There's a great story that I use as a teaching tool also. You guys, should we take a break? You guys ready? We don't need it. You guys, it's up to you. 5 minutes stretch, yoga. We can do our yoga postures. No? Huh? No, I don't need a break. I'm used to going 3 hours at a time.
Supposed to stand up every half hour.
Okay, look at, there's a great story that every single kid in India knows by heart. Because India is a multi-religious country just like the United States is. But every little kid in kindergarten, they all learn this story. And it has a message. And it's a religious message. In a village of India were 5 blind men who lived together. And one day they happened to come near an animal which someone told them was an elephant. What is an elephant like, they asked. They were invited to feel the elephant's body. So the first blind man said, why, an elephant is like a pillar, because he felt only the elephant's leg. No, it's like a barrel, answered the second, for he had only felt the belly. The third man said it was like a rope, because he felt the tail. The fourth blind man felt the elephant's trunk and declared it was like a hose. And the last man said it was like a winnowing fan. The elephant's like a winnowing fan because he felt only the ears. And then they started to argue about whose perception was the correct one. Right? Each one said that their description of the elephant was the true description of the elephant. And they began to argue. So what's the message? Because India, has Hindus and Muslims and Sikhs and Jains and some Zoroastrians who they call Parsis. They have Buddhists, very small now number. What's the message? What are they trying to teach kids? Huh? That what? The entirety of God is unknowable. Unknowable. I like that answer, actually. Yeah. But they argued because they said that their perception was the correct and true one. So I think what we can take away from that exercise is that the blind men each thought their distinctive experience represented the truth. And likewise, members of one religious tradition often believe their experience of the divine is the true one. So each religion teaches truth. The mistake is that believing one's grasp of the divine, whether you call it God or whatever you want to call it, is the one and only perspective of the truth. Listen, God is too big for one religion. Even too big for one planet, one universe, too big. And what happens when we think that our perspective is the true and only one? I would recommend this book, Living Buddha, Living Christ, by Thich Han. Came out in 1995. He's a Buddhist monk, Mahayana Buddhist monk from Vietnam. You guys watching the Vietnam stuff on TV? He was kicked out of South Vietnam by the Diem government. You guys remember that, Scott? How corrupt he was? He was kicked out for protesting against the government. He was what?
Not born.
Not born? What do you mean?
Phil was not.
He says people kill and are killed because they cling too tightly to their own beliefs and ideologies. When we believe that ours is the only faith that contains the truth, violence and suffering will surely be the result. And we see this a lot, don't we? Muslims are in the same boat, you know, Christians and Buddhists in Burma, same thing, right? Catholics in Northern Ireland and Protestants, it's, you know, it's actually an insane, it's an insanity. You guys ever read Robin Myers? From the United Church of Christ?
I don't know, those kinds are kind of sketchy.
Sketchy. He said in this book, which I would recommend reading too, Saving Jesus from the Church. He's a minister. He said, when Christians make the claim that only through Christ can one be saved, they display a fatal lack of trust in the power of other religious traditions to enlighten, edify, redeem, and transform. They mistrust ultimately the power of God to gather followers into the ways of wisdom and to reveal multiple levels of reality and consciousness, he says. It's a good book. He really is very critical of, you know, the televangelists and the big church syndrome, you know, and the prosperity gospel and all that kind of stuff. Sally McFaig is still around. She's also in her 90s. She's still living, as a matter of fact, and she's made so many contributions to theological studies in Christianity and religious studies. But, you know, she said, you know, religions, after studying religions, she said religions are houses to live in for a while with windows partly open and doors ajar. They become prisons, however, when they no longer allow us to come and go, to add a room, or to take one away, or even if necessary, to move out and build a new house. You guys get these? Frank and Ernie, right? So the guys, there's a big sign here at St. Peter's Gate. This is supposed to be St. Peter's Gate, and it says, "Welcome to heaven." And one sign says the right religion entrance, and the other one says wrong religion entrance. And the guys are saying, the funny thing is none of them ever get the joke. Of course, everybody's going to go in the right religion one, right? I love that. When I was in graduate school at the University of Hawaii, I had to study this guy right here, this theologian, Dutch philosopher, Jewish, had problems, you know, with the church and with the Jewish community as well. But Spinoza, you know, the ethics is hard to get through some of this stuff, but I always remembered, took away a lot from him. And one of the things I remembered stuck with me to this very day. And he said that whenever I've been confronted with that which is unfamiliar to me, I sought neither to praise nor condemn, but just to understand it. That's the beginning. That's the kind of attitude that we need to have, right? I think as Christians, as Muslims, as Buddhists, as Sikhs, we all need to have that kind of attitude. So there's a problem that you're going to run into, I think, which, you know, explains some of these differences. But, you know, when you ask the question, what is religion? You know, sometimes you'll get this in a classroom setting. Well, what do you mean by religion? I never try to define what religion is. Never try to do it. But I point out these kinds of issues, that how one defines religion is relative to and conditioned by the culture he or she lives in. That's a given. So how we define religion may not be the way a Confucian would define religion, right? And secondly, how one defines religion may prevent one from seeing the religious in another culture. Can you see how that might be true? It might prevent us from even seeing what's religious in another culture. Third one, how one defines religion may restrict possibilities for spiritual insights and enrichment and maybe even enlightenment. You see how this could be true also? If we come at studying religions with a very narrow mindset, we're not only going to see the religious in others, but we're going to really limit ourselves to our own spiritual journey. We might not be able to take away what we should be taking away from it. How one defines religion may prevent one from seeing similarities in universal principles and truths among world religions. I think everybody can probably see the truth of that. So a couple things here. One, this is an interesting study that was done in Japan in 1985. And the first time I went to Japan was in 1986. And I was aware that they were going to publish the results of this survey, which they actually did in 1987. So I had to wait the next year when I went to Japan in 87 to get the results of this survey. It's the first, really, an important step that the Japanese government took. They wanted to find out, more about the religious populations in Japan. They wanted to know more about the people. They wanted to know how many people were Buddhists. They wanted to know how many people were Shintoists. They wanted to know how many Buddhist temples we have and how many Shinto shrines we have and what sect of Buddhism do you belong to. How many Christians do we have in the country? They got all this data. And it came under the jurisdiction of the Agency for Cultural Affairs, which comes under the Department of Education, the equivalent of that anyway in Japan. And I looked at the study, and this is one thing that really stuck out like a sore thumb. On that survey, there were 115,600,000 people identified themselves as Shintoists. And 92 million or so identified themselves as Buddhists. So you do the math, and you come up with about 207 million people. But you know what? There was only 126 million people living in Japan in 1985. So what do we take away from this? What do we take away from this? Go ahead.
It's funny how deeply religious we sometimes think we are. These are deeply religious people, but they're flexible.
Totally flexible. Phil.
Cheating for me to answer this one. But
Oh.
the family goes to the Buddhist priest for certain rituals, the Shinto priest for others. The ones that consider dead bodies unclean, you don't go to them for funerals, and
Go to
so
the Buddhists for
it
that.
depends on which aspect of life they're dealing with, which part they go with.
Yeah. In places like Japan, it is perfectly acceptable to be both a Shintoist and a Buddhist at the same time. There's no problem with that. But that's a very different mindset than what you have here in the West. You don't hear people going around saying, well, I'm a Muslim and I'm a Christian. You don't hear people saying that here, do you? In Japan, it is very typical to be a Shintoist and a Buddhist at the same time. And not only in Japan, but if you go to China, you go to Taiwan, people, when I first went to Taiwan, I wanted to go to this Confucian temple, which I did. And inside that Confucian temple is a statue of Guan Yin, right? Which is a Buddhist deity, bodhisattva. On the wall are sayings from the Tao Te Ching, right? Taoist stuff in there. They had a yin and yang symbol in there. It's in a Confucian temple. Nobody is hung up on being a Taoist and a Buddhist and a Confucian at the same time. It's not a problem. They take what they can from each religion because they're just like us, we're on a journey. We're on a spiritual journey. You take what's useful for you at the time. And just like Phil said that, in Japan, the same family will get their child, they'll go to the Shinto shrine, they have the child named or something like that, but if somebody dies, it's not Shinto, I'll tell you that. They go to the Buddhist temples for all that. Marriage, I had a friend who she wanted her and her husband wanted a Shinto wedding Father said, no problem. And then she said she also wants a Christian one. The father is like, man, how are we supposed to do this? This is a lot of money. 2 weddings, a Christian one, a Buddhist one, and a Shinto one at the same time. Man. So, but they did it,
Doug?
Yeah.
You mentioned Thomas Merton earlier, who had
Yeah.
Thich Nhat Hanh up there.
Yeah.
And Merton got in trouble because he would go sit in meditation
He
with
did.
Thich Nhat Hanh and then invite Thich Nhat Hanh to come and receive communion.
It's unbelievable. It's great. It's a great story. It's a great story. They were good friends. Thomas Merton, Thich Nhat Hanh. All right, very quickly we can do this and call it an evening, right? All right, so I think if we're going to study the religions of the world, at least some of them, we can't do them all in 6 weeks, obviously. But we should know where they are. We should know a little bit about numbers and, like I said, even some of the terminology and all of that. But, let's just quickly take a look at some of this because I think you're going to find some of this rather interesting. Start out with another question. It says, which grouping of the religions below represent them in descending size of estimated world membership? So starting from the most to the least. Okay? So what do you think? The sequence of Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, Hinduism, Judaism, B, C, or D? I hear a lot of people saying C. Is that what you're thinking? What are you guys thinking? Let me see hands for A. Nobody says A? It's amazing. What about B? Islam, Christianity. C? Okay. Correct response is D. Correct response is D. There are more Christians in the world than there are Muslims, and all the way down. There are more Muslims than there are Hindus, and there are more Hindus than there are Buddhists. And then more Buddhists than there are Jews. Each religion below is correctly matched with the countries in which each of which it predominates except. So in other words, is Christianity a dominant religion in these 3 countries? It is. Okay, we should already know that. Even though it's Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholicism, right? What about letter B, Islam? Is it a dominant religion? You should know this by now too. In Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, which is in Africa, right? And Indonesia, Southeast Asia. Buddhism, Thailand, Sri Lanka, Japan. Hinduism, India. That's good to go, right? Except for Pakistan and Afghanistan. Islamic. So the correct response is D. All right, how many have heard of the term global village? How many It's a great band from Lansing. What does it mean to you? What's global village mean? It's a term that was invented by Marshall McLuhan, who was a Canadian philosopher back in the 1960s. No. It's about technology. Marshall McLuhan, you might be thinking of Timothy Leary or somebody like that. But Marshall McLuhan's this Canadian philosopher who said that, the world is becoming like a global village. It's becoming like a village because of communications technologies. It's making the world smaller and smaller and smaller. And so now, I can call up my friend in Japan, Imai, and it takes, 90 seconds to do that. If I was to send him a letter in the old days, it would take 5 weeks to get across the ocean. But now it's like we're neighbors. Everybody's neighbors, right? This is a global neighborhood that we live in right now. That's what they mean by global village. It's like a global neighborhood. Everybody's connected now, even if the distances are great. So technology has collapsed all the distance. So the question then becomes, what would the global village look like from the standpoint of world religions? You know, if you could do this, and researchers have done this, if you could take this global village, this 7 billion people that make up our planet's population, if you could reduce that population to a village of 100 people, theoretically, what would it look like from a religious standpoint? 33 of those 100 would be Christian. 14 or 21 would be Muslim. 16, this is an interesting stat, would have no religious affiliation whatsoever. 14 would be Hindu. 6 would be Buddhist. 6 would be Confucian / Taoist. 4 would be Sikh, Jewish, other. If you look at pie graphs, I like pie graphs, right? This is the way it would pan out. This is what the global village would look like. So that one question that you had, Christianity has the largest numbers by far. Well, not by too far. Islam, they predict, will probably catch up by 2050. Christianity is the largest religion worldwide. But, if you look at the number of denominations, one of the things that's really, really startling about this is that there are over 33,000 different Christian denominations. 33,000. It's amazing. Islam is the world's second largest religion in terms of adherents. Maybe about 21% of the population of the world is a Muslim. That's pretty high, right? There are this is an interesting little piece of information about Islam. There are 25 countries on the planet Earth that have made Islam their official state religion. There are more Sikhs in the world. There's almost twice as many Sikhs as there are Jews. Jewish religion is in decline. Buddhism is the fourth largest religion with adherents. Buddhism in the 20th century has really been the most suppressed religious system by far, especially in China, Tibet, right, Vietnam, other places. It's really dwindled in some of its numbers. But anyway, it's an interesting thing. And I just want to go through this very quickly because, if you take a regional approach to world religions, you can see what religion dominates in one particular geographical area. If you look at Europe, well, obviously Christianity is going to be the dominant religion. Catholics and Protestants, right? And then you're going all the way down to Hindus. There's still over 1 million Hindus in Europe. But look at this numbers, 45 million Muslims in Europe. Probably about 10% of the population of France is Islamic, right? Albania that we had up there, about 60-some% of it is Islamic. So there's some, and it's a growing population in European countries. If you look at Asia, which is the largest continent on our planet, there are more Muslims than any other religious system in Asia. Hinduism comes in second, but very close second. About 80% of India's population is Hindu. And then you got Buddhism, Christianity, Sikhism. This is how it fans out anyways in Asia. In Africa, Christianity is the dominant religion, but it's very neck and neck with Islam. If you look at the country of, say, Nigeria, Nigeria is almost split in half between Muslims and Christians. And you can see, you know, some of the organizations like Boko Haram, who are they attacking? Christian communities mostly, right? Baha'i, have you guys looked, but I like this, indigenous, right? These are the indigenous religions. They're neither Christian or Muslim. They're just their own African, Yoruba religion, whatever. Have you guys heard of Baha'i? There's quite a few Baha'is in Africa. In North America, Christianity, as we would expect, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism. Buddhism is the fourth largest religion in the United States also. It's Buddhism and Islam, or Islam and Judaism are very neck and neck in terms of numbers. I've seen there's all sorts of different numbers that you get sometimes depending on what source, so you have to really play a kind of a game with where you're getting your information. I like using the World Book or Book of Facts because they use a lot of different resources to get their information from, including the CIA World Fact Book. But anyway, there's almost 2 million Hindus in the United States. If you look at Latin American countries, and I'm also including the Caribbean in this part of it, so most of it is Christian. But Baha'i now has gone up to being the fourth, right? And then the countries that have the largest Hindu population, I'm going to use the four most populated religions, Hinduism, Islam, Buddhism, and Christianity. If you look at the Hindu, you know, most Hindus live here in India, 80% of the population. The United States is has the eighth largest Hindu population in the world. Buddhists, Japan, as we said before, but it may be China. Then Thailand, Vietnam, Burma, Sri Lanka. Countries with the highest population of Christians, United States, of course, Brazil. Second one, Mexico. Look at that, almost 100% of Mexico is Christian. You know what the other 2.5% is? Mayan. Indigenous religions. Russia, high population of Christians. Philippines, we said before. Muslims, Indonesia, we said this before. Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Egypt. You got the percentages and you also got the numbers. And I wanted to put this up here. We'll wrap things up here in a second, but when you look at world maps like this, and you get these in textbooks, you get these on posters and stuff about world religions, and you'll see them up in different places, but you know, what's the problem with using these kinds of maps? It's not just these maps, but you know, similar maps, but I think as an educated person, you have to be thinking about some things when looking at these maps. What's one thing that you really should be asking the map maker about?
It doesn't show the diversity at all.
That's exactly right. It doesn't show the diversity of religions. It doesn't show the religious pluralism in the United States. When you look at a map like this, it looks like most of the people are Protestant in the U.S. It doesn't say anything about Buddhists, doesn't look, and then the blue stuff, you know, are Catholic. Doesn't even take into consideration all the other religions that we have. So it's very, very generalized when you look at these kinds of maps. You have to ask yourself, what was the intent of the map maker? What's the intent of the map maker? Use all the colors. And I brought this into the picture to wrap things up tonight because it is so much in line with what this church does. With our sign right here in the back and outside, right? You know, in 1993, people from various world religions got together and said, you know what, let's have a chit chat and hobnob time. And they got together in Chicago. Why Chicago? Because it represents the 100th anniversary of the first Parliament of World Religions. It was held during the World's Fair in Chicago in 1893. So they said, you know what, it's time that we all get together. This is in 1993. Let's talk about our religious systems. Let's talk about what we have in common. What are some of the common problems facing all of us, not just us as Christians or Buddhists? What do we have in common, right? And they came up with a document, right? They wrote a document called the Declaration of a Global Ethic. And a lot of the stuff that's in that Declaration of a Global Ethic of 1993, I find, you know, on the sign that you guys have. I said, you know what, this is cool. You guys are way ahead of the game. But there were like 6,000 representatives from world religions at this conference in 1993. There were Buddhists, there were Hindus, there were Shiite Muslims and Sunni Muslims and Sufis. There were all sorts of different denominations from various world religions. There's, you know, gurus there. Ramakrishna's disciple Vivekananda gave a beautiful speech at the end of the session. But this is what all world religions that were there at that conference agreed on. They all agreed on this. They said that we, as a religious community, as a world parliament of religions, condemn the disregard for justice, which pushes citizens to the margin, the anarchy overtaking our communities, the insane death of our children from violence. All of the religions that were represented there said, yes, this is a problem, and we condemn violence in the name of religion. They condemned aggression and hatred in the name of religion. They condemned environmental abuse. Condemned sexual exploitation and sexual discrimination as the worst forms of human degradation. It condemned armament among nations as a way to solve problems. I'm thinking about this global ethic. I'm thinking, boy, it's really relevant, isn't it? Still relevant today, in 2017. And they thought so too. Because from 1993, they said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to have a meeting of all these religious systems again in 5 years. And they started doing this calendar. They said, we're going to have a meeting every 5 years. We're going to get together. We're going to have our chit-chat hobnob sessions. We're going to have speakers. We're going to do all this stuff just to reaffirm what we all believe. This is what we all can agree on. We all believe it. So after Chicago, they had one in Cape Town, and it went to Barcelona, Spain, right? Went to Melbourne. The one in Brussels was canceled because 2014, we're in the middle of the economic crisis in Europe. It's falling apart. So they canceled it. And they had one in 2015 in Salt Lake City, Utah. Next year, go to Toronto. That's where it's happening, right? You can do it. Next week, Hinduism. Okay? So you guys have any questions or anything you want to discuss? Anything?
Are you going to cover Christianity?
At the end, we will. We'll talk about Christianity as it relates to other world religions. Yep. You guys are already taking a class on Christian history, right? Go ahead. I heard the word breakdown. I can't hear. I wear a hearing aid, so go ahead.
whatever.
Yeah, you know what? There's a big percentage. If we go back to that pie graph that we had up here, if you look at this non-religious, 16% of the world's population, atheists, agnostic, you know, just non-secular, just non-religion, don't put anything down on the surveys. About 16%. And this pie graph is interesting also because when you look at it from this perspective of a global village, it means that 2/3 of the world's population is not Christian. It's not Christian. So, you know, we have an obligation as Christians to really, you know, try to understand and find out who our neighbors are. You might like them. You might like them. Might invite you over for dinner or something. You know, wouldn't that be cool? Okay, other questions? You guys have any other things to think about?
What's the question back there?
He asked what percentage of the world population has no religion?
Oh, okay, thank you.
16%, roughly. Chris?
I find it interesting that in that 16%, one of the things that it said was that half of them were theistic, but
Yes.
not religious.
Yes. They believe in God, but they don't go to church. They don't go to a temple. You know, they don't go to into the mosque. You know, they're theistic. You know, Pope Francis said, you know, I'll see if I can find that quotation. He said that, you know, sometimes our view of God is just kind of outdated nowadays. He says, you don't have to go to church or give money to a church to be a good person. You can still be a religious person or a spiritual person without going to church. That's the Pope who said that. I love that guy, actually. I really do. He's one of the best things that's happened since Vatican II.
One of the points you made on there was that on the global, or
The global village,
no, the last part,
this one.
yeah.
Parliament of
Okay,
Religions.
but you had that sexual discrimination is the worst form of human degradation.
Degradation, yeah.
How many religions keep women as?
I know. I
When
know.
you said that, I'm just sitting there thinking,
Yeah.
The follow-up is, the people in these religions willing to come to a parliament of religions are not the folks in very repressive forms of these religions.
Yeah.
So you do get
It's already biased in that
it's
sense.
a self-selected group that's more likely to look at that
Yeah.
from that perspective.
because I was saying that to me just seemed kind of a surprise when I heard it.
Yeah. A lot of work needs to be done to implement this.
Here alone.
A lot of work, yeah, here alone, it's in the United States. Other questions? You guys good to go or what? What's on TV tonight? Antiques Roadshow is already off. That was on last night. You know, what's on tonight, you know? Phil, go ahead.
I was in seminary. I started in '94 in Chicago, and a lot of the things discussed actually came out of the World Parliament of Religions. And the one thing the media showed was that the Sunnis and the Shiites got into a fist fight. And as people pointed out, what the media wasn't showing was that was the only problem, and if it's just a fist fight, we're doing much better than usual. But that's the only thing that made the news, not the declaration, not the ways people were coming together from multiple cultures, multiple religions, multiple areas.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what the news does always,
Media.
so I don't watch the news. So who can go to that?
Anybody.
Anybody, okay, let's get it.
Road trip.
You can sign up, listen, if you go online right now, you go online and it'll say, you know, how to do it. It'll have the forms and all that kind of stuff, and you might have to be represented by your church or something like that to do it, but, you know, people can go there. It'd be great. Wouldn't it be great to go to Toronto? I mean, I'd go there for the parliament, but I'd hang out in Toronto too.
Summer or winter?
Let me think. I don't know. You have to go online. I think it's in the summer.
I just want to know who's got the best food.
Toronto does.
Oh, I mean like Sikhs
Huh?
who's got the best food? Sikhs, Buddhists? I mean,
Try them all.
Wow.
I used to really enjoy a good bar mitzvah every once in a while, you know. They lay out quite a table.
The Sikhs and the Hindus, and have very similar diets. The Buddhists, if you're in Vietnam or Thailand, a lot of it is it's more vegetarian choices, but they're not vegetarians.
Just want to know whose hotel to stay at in 2018. Whose hotel are we going to stay at in 2018?
A lot of people stay at the Sheraton because it has an outdoor pool and an indoor pool. And it's up on you can look outside, it's up maybe about 4 or 5 floors up, and you can look out, and you can go from the indoor to the outdoor. Sheraton. You park underground there, and you got it made in the shade. It's right downtown. You can walk underground in all of the different, the areas of town. You can just do it all underground if the weather's bad.
That's right where we were last time we were there, yeah.
I love it. Hinduism next week, you guys. Okay?